You are about to see a clip from a debate that happened at Southampton University between Dr. John Lennox and Dr. Peter Atkins. They're about to discuss a topic of purpose. Should we ask the question of, is there purpose in life or in the world? Is there purpose? Is purpose a thing that exists? Stay tuned and pay attention.
Let's talk about reasons, because you've both brought this up, and explanations, different types of questions that we ask. Peter, you've said there are sort of nonsense questions that we simply shouldn't be asking because they're not the kind of questions we should be pursuing, like, is there a purpose to the universe? John, from what I can tell, you believe those are valid questions because they are, even if they're of a different nature to the specifically scientific questions.
And intention questions are among the most important questions we can ask.
And I've had a question actually from the audience which asks, I assume of you, Peter, isn't it a bit too convenient to label questions that science doesn't answer as stupid or not real?
Well, it seems very sensible to clear the way so that you can have a sensible conversation about real questions.
But why is the question of what are we here for not a real question in your view?
Because there's no evidence that there is any purpose in the universe. You've got to look for evidence. And as I actually did say right at the beginning, I think, that the real questions are based on evidence. The silly questions, the fake questions, if you like, are based on extrapolations of human experience, if you like. So we have purposes. I have a purpose for coming here this evening, although I must confess I forget what it was.
So you believe in purpose but not ultimate purpose, is that it?
Well, I believe that people have individual, temporary, ephemeral purposes. That's fine. But for there to be a purpose in the universe is an extrapolation of that attitude. There is no evidence that the universe has a purpose at all. So it's inappropriate for science to do a series of experiments to discover the purpose.
John?
Well, when you say there's no evidence, I would go back to the fact, and I must, in that sense, come back to my Christian faith. Christianity is not a mere philosophy. It's geared into history. And it seems to me that the whole initial explanation, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, that starts off a huge meta-narrative that gives human beings huge significance as made in the image of God. Now, that may be true or it may be false, but does it make sense? It's not one of these nonsense things. It certainly makes a great deal of sense. And incidentally, some of the brightest minds in history have spent years thinking about these things.
I've just read through Anthony Kenner's Modern History of Western.
Yes.
Great 1,000-page.
Yeah, I know.
Brick.
I've read it too.
900 of those pages show what a waste of time philosophy was when people were worrying about the nature of God and his or her the properties. Philosophy, just famous St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, you name them, completely wasted their lives by thinking about non-questions. It's only when...
But that's your belief, Peter.
Yeah, but there's no evidence for God. It's the basis of that's the core of my belief. That's what we're talking about.
But is that an assumption you're coming to it with, Peter?
Let me say, there is no evidence for God. That is the rock on which I build my system of explanations. Your rock is a kind of elaboration of that, because this physiologically unlikely event of the resurrection sort of came into it.
It's physiologically immensely unlikely, but the evidence of it doesn't stop at the little bit I gave you. You have to think about the whole rise of Christianity from a non-proselytizing
People
group
want
of Jews.
lazy explanations.
Well,
and-
let's
and
allow
they want-
John to
and
give at
they-
least some explanation,
Yeah,
Peter, and then
yeah.
we'll have you respond.
The rock in my life is I'm looking for a worldview, and you have a worldview, it's atheism, and I have a worldview that is Christian, that makes sense of life and gives me a meta-narrative big enough to live for and live in. Now, we've been talking tonight, all up to this time, about science and evidence that might come from the natural world. I believe that the natural world with its laws that Peter writes about brilliantly, and I envy him his ability, those very laws are indicators, to my mind, of a divine mind. The fact that at the heart of biology is the longest word we've ever discovered, the genetic code, is again consistent that this universe is a word-based universe. In the beginning was the Word. All things were made by him. So I see evidence of rational intelligence all over science. But I see that the alternative worldview, atheism, undermines that, although it perceives the very same rational intelligence. And so as explanatory power at that level, but you see, I did say Christianity is not merely a philosophy. And if Jesus Christ really rose from the dead, then that opens up huge possibilities of personal encounter in my life now. And the major reason why I believe that Christianity is true is because, and here comes science again as a base, because Christianity is testable.
Oh, nonsense. How can it be tested?
Well, Peter, let me face that head on. Christ said when he was on earth.
Didn't, but go ahead.
Christ said that if a person considered the evidence and came to believe that he was God incarnate, who was dying on a cross to give forgiveness and bring peace with God, well, we can test that. I've tested it. And I've seen hundreds of people test it. I mean, take an example. I was lecturing at Harvard a while ago to a couple of thousand people. And when I'd finished, a young Chinese student stood up and he said, "Look at me." So we looked at him. And I said, "Why should we look at you?" He was absolutely beaming. He said, "You should look at me because 6 months ago I came to a lecture you gave at Penn State University. I was at the end. My life was in a complete mess. And something you said triggered a search. And I started to read the New Testament for myself, and I became a Christian. And just look at me now." Now, ladies and gentlemen, I've seen that happen not once, not twice, dozens of times. And when you see addiction to drugs transformed into food on the table, when you see broken relationships mended, and you ask people, "What happened to you?" And they say variously, "I became a Christian, I had an encounter with Christ." You begin to put two and two together and make four. And I wouldn't sit here for a nanosecond if I didn't believe that these promises that Jesus made actually can be fulfilled in a person's life today. And that's immensely important to me, the testability of Christian relationship with
Well,
God.
it's a kind of testability that you should leave to the psychologists and the psychiatrists, I think.
But I don't mind the psychiatrists. What do you mean, leave it to them?
Well,
The
because they
psychologists-
will understand why these people have found the comfort. Let's accept that it may be comfort.
But that doesn't prove it's wrong,
in-
Peter, to use your argument. The fact that Christianity brings comfort is not evidence against it. It may well be evidence for it. If it
Interesting discussion. There's 2 points I really want to hone in on. And the first one was at the beginning, the discussion about purpose. And a quote that I have from there is Peter Atkins. He said, "There's no evidence for purpose, but we ask these silly/fake questions that come from an extrapolation of human experience." And John Lennox, the way that he sort of understood it, and he stated his understanding of what that meant, was saying, you believe in a purpose, but no ultimate purpose. And again, Peter Atkins went back to asserting that there's no evidence the universe has a purpose, which even that just seems very contradictory to even us speaking or talking, because we would define having a discussion as there's a purpose behind us having this discussion. Maybe it's to help people with knowledge. Maybe it's to educate or to better someone's life. But what we would define a lot of our actions is that there's a purpose behind it. There's a reason we're doing these things. And so we would see that just naturally, that there's a way we think. Like if I walk into a garage and I look at a hammer on the shelf, I would see there's a purpose for that. It's to hammer things. Or a saw, the purpose is to cut things. Even if I saw tools I didn't know about, I would instinctively or understandingly just see there's a purpose behind it. Then if we're outside of what man has made, we can look at trees, we can look at nature around us, and we would just see that, okay, there's this fruit on the tree. And I would think, okay, maybe the purpose of this fruit is so I can eat it, and that's why it's here. But if I observed it more, I would just see, okay, well, when fruit goes to the ground, a tree grows up. So it reproduces. And so what we would label that is that we'd call it that. There's a purpose on that. It's doing something. There's a reason for the fruit. And maybe we can even say it's delicious so that birds would eat it. And that would help the reproductive process. And there's a lot of other reasons behind fruit. But you see the point that it's not a human-made construction of saying that there must be purpose. It's just everything around us is speaking out to it. Every action that we have, even if we weren't here, that would still be the case, that there is purpose. And so we can't just erase it, because it doesn't make sense to say that it's just a man-made construction. So there must be something more behind that. And it would be nice for the discussion to go more into that area. But on the last thing I wanted to talk about, the second point and the last point was the evidence. Is that Dr. Atkins was saying there's no evidence for there being a God. There's no evidence for spirituality. At the same time, he was discouraging anyone from asking those questions or seeking, saying it's even sillier to even ask the questions. But Dr. Lennox, he was speaking about, well, here's the evidence, is that he's seen many lives transformed, so many people changed. He's seen that people have repented and their lives have been turned around, have been comforted and helped. And that was the evidence that Dr. Lennox gave. And I would just like to read from the Bible. And there's a book in the Bible called John. And in John chapter 3, a man was asking Jesus, what is it? What are you talking about? Being born again, this spiritual reality of us having a spirit that needs to have life in it. And so Jesus was explaining it to him. And he tells him in John 3, verse 5, Jesus said, "Truly, truly, I say, unless one is born of water and of spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God. That which is of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the spirit is spirit." He said, "Do not marvel that I say this to you. You must be born again." Okay, now here's the analogy that he gives. He says, "The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear its sound, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit." And so you see Jesus is even teaching this process of reasoning and logic, where we don't see it, but we're observing, and we're saying there's a purpose here. Where we are observing. It's just like the wind. We don't see the wind, but we see all these leaves being blown by it, all these different birds riding the wind. We see it doing things. We can see its actions, but we don't see it. And it's the same way with everyone born of the Spirit, is that they're born again and they're a spiritual being. And that's the interesting thing, is to think that there is evidence if we just observe, and it's right in front of us for us to reach out. So I hope everyone enjoyed this video. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this of the same content, and leave any comments and if there's any questions about the discussion that you have. And I just want to encourage everyone to keep seeking after God, and He will show you Himself. He will manifest Himself, and all the evidence you will need will be found in Him.